Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Lundholm-Eads, and I direct programs and services for the Leadership Roundtable. And it's my pleasure to be the moderator of this session. The title is Changing Church Culture, Institutionalizing Best Managerial and Leadership Practices in Every Parish, in Every Diocese. And to help us today, we have with us Father Monsignor Bill Stumpf from the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. We have Dr. Barbara Ann Cusack, who's from the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. And then we have Jim Harrell, who is from the Archdiocese of Atlanta. And there'll be 4 parts to this session. We're going to ask each of the panelists to speak for a short time and make a few general points about, specific points about our topic. And then we'll have a conversation with just the panel amongst ourselves, and then we'll turn to our table conversations. And then we'll come back after that for a plenary Q&A and commentary part of the session. Monsignor Bill Stumpf is currently the Vicar General of his Archdiocese and has broad experience in a range of areas, including the St. Luke, having worked at the St. Luke Institute in a clinical capacity. His Archdiocese has been engaged in significant shift in culture and has a roadmap for change that they are doing in a coherent way, in partnership to some degree with the Roundtable and also with the Lilly Foundation as well. It's encompassed changes in temporal administration, leadership, organisational design, and refocusing the Chancery, as well as working with the parishes as well. Dr. Barbara Ann Cusack is the Chancellor for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee and has been since 1994. And her doctorate is in canon law, and she is the canon lawyer to whom canon lawyers go when they want advice, nationally known in that world. She's taught in our toolbox since 2012, and she has the distinction of having been Chancellor, the Chancellor in the US who has been most bankrupted for most years. Her Archdiocese has been in bankruptcy for many years, and so cultural and practical change has been part of her life for many years now. Jim Harrell is Parish Business Administrator at St. Anne's in the Archdiocese of Atlanta, and he is a former COO of and Senior Vice President in the corporate world in the textile industry and other industries. And he's been working that job in a parish for 8 years, and his parish has undergone transformative change during that time. And he was introduced to us by the CFO of his Archdiocese as the thought leader at parish level in his Archdiocese. So with that introduction, could I ask Dr. Barbara Ann Cusack to come to the podium?
Thank you, Jim. It's always a pleasure to be with this group, always enlightening, presenting new challenges. I will be speaking from a diocesan perspective, and I also have the distinction of having been through 5 episcopal changes, 3 in archbishops, 2 diocesan administrators. So when you're talking about different types of changes, I've seen 5 different types of changes. What I'd like to look at is the process of decision-making and how that happens at a diocesan level and then filters through parish level. Who's at the decision-making table affects not only what the decisions are, but how they are made. And so Episcopal leadership needs to look at that decision-making table and see who are the faces that are looking back. Are there only clerics involved? Is there a mix of clergy and laity? Are people present by reason of position or by reason of expertise? How much of a team is that decision-making group? And yes, it's a great distinction to have been the diocese in Chapter 11 the longest. But as part of that 5-year process, It was very much a team-driven approach. Decisions were made informed from many different perspectives. None of us challenge the fact that the diocesan bishop is the decision maker, but different styles of episcopal leadership affect the dynamics of decision making. Is the time at the table used to provide facts and information to the diocesan bishop, who then takes the information away and decides on his own or with a group not easily identifiable? Is there open discussion of options available and weighing of potential outcomes for various decisions? Is the bishop comfortable allowing the people at the table to be decision shapers, if not decision makers? I've worked with episcopal leadership that was information gathering, and decisions were made, and those who were supposedly at the decision-making table often didn't know how the decision had ultimately been made. I've been with episcopal leadership where there was a lot of discussion at the table. There were lots of different voices and faces at the table, but the decider found it very difficult to decide. And so the decision-making process went on for a very long time. And I've been with episcopal leadership who really does see a team approach as being the one that is most effective, and a leadership style that would be offended if the opposition voices were not heard in the decision-making process. I've had episcopal leadership where you really were able to say, Archbishop, you really don't want to make that decision, and would stop and reconsider. The same type of decision-making applies when we're looking at curial, diocesan curial leadership, but also with various advisory groups, for example, diocesan finance councils. I won't say shocked, I'm surprised when I talk to colleagues and I hear that their diocesan finance councils really have no statutes that guide how they function, that information is filtered to the Diocesan Finance Council, that decisions are made, and only after there's publicity about the decision do some of the members of the Finance Council even know what the decision was. So we've been talking about transparency and communication. The same thing has to be done in the decision-making processes that we use at the diocesan level.
Good afternoon, and I want to thank the council for inviting me here. I bring a little different perspective, perhaps. I do want to promise you that these remarks were written before I got here, and I just haven't been cherry-picking the key words and elements out of what the other people have been saying. Rather, I think what you should extract from that, as I come from a parish, is that what we're talking about in theory, when we talk about these issues, that at the parish level, they can make a difference. So my role on this panel was to show how embracing these leadership and management principles can improve the parish's ability to meet its mission and to meet the challenges that have been set forth by Pope Francis. The Archdiocese of Atlanta has challenged the parishes to reach out into the lay community and find leaders who are qualified to assist in the leading and management. Our parish, for example, has 2 C-level executives on staff, myself and my cohort, who was a C-level executive at UPS. A little bit about St. Anne's, because I think what we've done shows how employing these principles has worked. We are the 6th largest parish in the Archdiocese of Atlanta in registered families, and we're the 4th largest in offertory. The median age of the adult population in our parish is 45 years old compared to a national average of 49 years old. As a matter of fact, the median age of new parishioners in the last 4 years is 39 and a half years old. We are getting younger as the Catholic Church as a whole is getting older. We're a growing parish. 10 years ago, a mission parish was opened about 5 miles from us, and our registry dropped down to 3,200 families. Today, we are again at 4,500 families, and we're annualizing at a real growth of about 3%. We're staffed by a religious order, the Missionaries of Our Lady of La Salette, and we find that to be an advantage because as pastors and priests come and go, the charism that they bring from their order to the parish remains. And that is a significant thing because it gives the parish a reason for being. Today, I want to touch on a few key points built around engagement. And engagement is getting people to belong, believe, and become disciples of Christ. In August of 2012, Pope Benedict affirmed the direction that St. John Paul II set along with the Vatican Council in asking the lay faithful to take a critical role alongside the clergy in the being and activity of our church. This calls for a change in mentality, whereas the laity are no longer considered collaborators, but they are co-responsible for the church. No longer can we, the laity, sit on the sidelines and watch. Our faith is not a spectator sport. It requires involvement. It requires us to be part of it. So how does co-responsibility manifest itself at the parish level? Our pastor had spent 13 years in provincial administration. He was the provincial of the La Salettes at one time. And when he came to St. Anne's, he was anxious to get back into relational ministry. And what he did, one of the first things he did, was he changed the parish council to a pastoral council. Now you may ask, what's the difference, or is there even a difference? And let me just tell you, a parish council by its nature seems to take on a governance mentality, if you will, much like what our Protestant congregation brethren have in their congregations, where a pastoral council is asked to take on a visioning rather than a governance approach to what they do. And let me give you an example. A parish council, in our case, would walk down the hallways and say, hey, the hallways need to be painted. They'd come together, they'd have a big discussion, they'd decide, somebody would recommend a color, they would vote on the color, and then they would give it to staff and say, we want them blue, and make them blue, okay? A pastoral council would take a more visioning aspect to that, and they would walk down and say, you know, we want our parish to have an inviting and welcoming atmosphere to it, an environment that invites people to be here. And when they discussed this and came to a consensus, they would pass the vision on to staff, not with all the details, but with the vision. This is what we want to create. And it would be up to staff to do that. This at St. Anne's was a critical step as it led to a body whose main goal and purpose was to engage the congregation in becoming disciples. Relevancy. While theatrics are a significant part of the growing non-denominational churches, the key to their growth is delivering the messages relevant in today's world. We are steeped in tradition in our liturgies. The Eucharist, the source and summit of our faith, clearly differentiates us from other religious denominations. However, we must strive to make the entire liturgy relevant. The gospel message must be tied to what is happening and relatable to our parishioners and in their lives today. Homilies must be engaging, not simple Bible studies or lessons in theology. And the music is it's the water, the lifeblood of the liturgy. Now, to accomplish this, we have a liturgy team, clergy and laity, and actually there's more laity on the team than there are clergy. And they come together bi-weekly, they read the readings, and then they come up with a consensus of what the theme for the next upcoming 2 weekends will be. and it is woven into every part of our liturgy. We're fully immersed in that theme. The bulletin cover, there's a full-page message on the inside with family-oriented questions. The welcoming screens, the music, the homily, everything ties together in a cohesive message that ties the gospel values to the lives of people today. Now, while each homilist brings their own perspective to the homily and to the message is the same at all 8 liturgies. So whenever you come, you're getting the same message. Changing culture begins with delivering the message in a way that people are open and responsive to it. We've talked about communication, and the world has changed dramatically in how we communicate. Everything is now. It's experiential, social media, video, lighting at masses, how we maintain our grounds and facilities, the music we choose, the staff we hire. All of those things communicate what we hold as valuable. Evangelization is going forth and proclaiming the gospel. So what is the difference between evangelization and marketing? I came from the business world. What's the difference? Nothing. Nothing except the product we are delivering is the greatest product ever, and we're bringing it to those people that haven't been exposed. We are taught to be humble. And some may call it bragging, but when we share how we are living the gospel values, how we are being Christ to others in the world, we are delivering hope. And I've heard that word used a number of times here. One simple post on our Facebook page about the Christian response to social justice reached over 930,000 people. From our church, they were at lunch, they put it up. We had one negative comment. Kind of amazing. We have a weekly newsletter that focuses on the ministry that we're doing and how we are working to change lives. And by its nature, it invites our parishioners to become part of it, to engage themselves in being disciples and ministers to those. We use video. Video does things that simple words spoken cannot. They're used to enhance liturgy when it's appropriate and to deliver the message through our newsletter and other means, and to bring this message in a way that we otherwise wouldn't. To date, we've had over 66,000 views on our YouTube channel of our videos. We also stream 2 masses weekly and other special events. The first time we did this, on Tuesday, we were having First Communion. And on Tuesday, I called in the AV and the music director and said, by the way, we're going to live stream this weekend, the masses, and we're going to announce it at practice tomorrow night. And they said, how? And I said, that's your job. My job's to come up with the idea. Your job's to make it happen. On that channel, we've had 58,000 views of people tuning in. All of this is designed to bring God's message to the world. Okay, so trying to tie it all together here a little bit, and I'll get off here, I'm probably going too long, but in today's world, running a church is significantly more difficult than in years past, and I think we've all heard that. No single item is the answer. It takes teamwork and it takes vision. Fewer priests, more demands, more transparency. Another word we've heard quite a bit of, because of past indiscretions, both fiscally and with the other things that have gone on. Changing horizons require skills more extensive and quite different from those taught in seminary. Co-responsible means that each of us, clergy and laity, utilize the gifts that we have been given from God to bring His love and message to the world. Good management and leadership leads to accomplishment. In our case, clergy and laity management was the catalyst that changed a 29-hour part-time bulletin job into a communications department. It took youth ministry in our parish from 1 full-time to 3 full-time youth ministers. It allowed us to expand our pastoral care, our music and liturgy departments, and it allowed us to become debt-free with $1.5 million in our savings. Instead of being overwhelmed by the business aspects of the church. We embraced them through this co-management, co-responsible, to maximize our ability to meet the mission. Mission is about people. The mission of the church is missions. The mark of a great church is not its seating capacity, it's sending capacity. It's how we reach out into the world. Everything we do, everything, must move us closer to the accomplishing the church's mission. If it does not, we're doing the wrong thing. Thank you.
Good afternoon. As Jim mentioned, I was asked to talk a little bit about an endeavor or a project that we're engaged in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis to basically try to empower and strengthen leadership and pastoral leaders, basically around management and leadership skills. And one of the ways that we have been able to do that is we are truly blessed. We have received a 3-year, $1 million grant from Lilly Endowment. And that has been a wonderful, wonderful gift to our Archdiocese. And what I want to do, though, before I get too much into how we're implementing that grant, is I want to give credit to a priest who's here from our Archdiocese who's been probably the driving force behind that grant, and that is Father Jeff Godecker, who's back over there. And Jeff did a wonderful job. He put together the preparation for our grant, and he actually was the principal grant writer. If it wouldn't have been for all of his hard work, we probably would not have been blessed with that grant. But, you know, in starting that whole grant process, one of the things we did, we heard early on in one of our first talks today that you need to find out who you are. And so through a series of interviews with 50 of our pastoral leaders, and that was not only pastors, but what we call in our Archdiocese parish life coordinators. They would be lay pastoral administrators and also some of our business managers and other pastoral leaders. It really revealed to us some very key findings. Now, they're not unique or new to us, but it was just good, I think, to have those confirmed for us as we started that process. And so I just want to highlight a few of those things that we found out through that interviewing process. One of the first things we found out is that 3/4 of all of our pastors and our parish life coordinators expressed that they had a lack of financial and leadership training. And I guess basically if you talk to them and say, well, you know, those kinds of skills were not part of my seminary training, or they were not part of my theology studies. And I think they were able to articulate that that lack of understanding has created a great deal of difficulty for them, or I guess minimally to say, made their pastoral leadership more challenging. Another thing we realized in the midst of doing this is that Indianapolis, we're changing as an archdiocese, just like every diocese. And we now have over 300 lay ecclesial ministers serving in our parishes. And because of that, the role of the pastor or the role of the parish life coordinator, you know, it really, really does continue to change. And so most of our pastors and most of our parish life coordinators, what they're really finding out in the midst of that role change is that they are now more supervisors. They're also finding out that they are team leaders. And we're also finding out that many, many of those folks feel very, very unprepared for that change of role that they're experiencing. And as I was thinking about all that, I was ordained 31 years ago, and I was thinking about the parish staff that I was a part of 31 years ago. And it was a large suburban parish for us. It had 1,700 families. It was my pastor, myself, there was a principal, a director of religious education, a bookkeeper, and a couple secretaries, and I think somewhere in there we hired a youth minister. That size staff was actually smaller than the staff that I most recently had before I was named Vicar General in a parish that probably only had 1,100 families. So, you know, parish staffs are becoming much, much larger as we go along. And I was also thinking back, you know, 31 years ago, no one ever talked about performance reviews. I don't even think there were any kind of job descriptions at that time. There might have been maybe for our school principal or maybe for the director of religious education. But that was a language and an experience that was not part of the church life at all. And so it goes almost without saying that for pastoral leaders, they're finding that their lives are very, very different these days. Parish life and parish leadership is far, far more complex. And because of that, it's pretty obvious that new skills are needed. A new skill set is actually needed, particularly in the areas of management, also in financial literacy, also in fundraising, and also in stewardship. So we sort of figured out, well, where we were, and then we said, well, where do we want to go? What do we want to have happen for our pastoral leaders in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis? And we definitely knew that we wanted them to be strengthened in their leadership, and that they would be better, and not only better, but excellent pastoral leaders. And so with the funding from the grant, we're implementing a number of different initiatives. But I just wanted to just share a few of those with you, because I think we're so blessed to be able to do that. The first thing we're doing is that we're inviting our pastors and our parish life coordinators, and eventually our business managers and some of our pastoral leaders, to participate in the Catholic Leadership 360. And we've already had our first cohort. We had that this spring. And for me, what was such a wonderful thing is our Archbishop did it. And he is the first bishop in the United States to go through the Leadership 360 process. And so it's not only the Archbishop, the Chancellor, myself, all the deans of the Archdiocese, and then we also picked out some other key pastoral leaders. And now we're already forming together for another second cohort to go through that in the fall, and we'll continue to do that over the life of the grant. And then we're also going to be inviting all of our new pastors and also all of our new parish life coordinators to participate in some way in the toolbox for pastoral management. And I think that will definitely give our new pastors and our parish life coordinators some of the skills that they really need in their pastoral leadership. And then, like all places, Indianapolis, our parishes, our dioceses, we're always facing issues around funding. And we certainly know that's a very, very critical element in all of our lives, because if you don't have funding, you can't go about bringing about the mission. And so we even decided to partner with the Lake Institute. You might be familiar with them. And so we are inviting any of our pastors and our parish life coordinators to participate in a program called Creating Congregational Cultures of Generosity. And then probably one of the things I'm most excited about is that we're actually doing something within our own Office of Stewardship and Development. And we are creating our own sort of hybrid project. It's just, in the discussion stages, but to actually go out and to work with all of our parishes in terms of helping them with stewardship programs for their parishes, particularly, obviously, to increase Sunday offerings. And, while the funding from Lily's has been, an extraordinary thing, and the grant itself, as I was reflecting back on this, I think maybe one of the other great blessings of receiving this grant is it's given us a focus as an archdiocese. It's given us a rationale for going ahead and doing this, and we probably would not have done that if we didn't have this opportunity for the grant. Like I said, the money's important, but I think it's drawn us all together and to be focused in trying to bring about an education of all of our pastoral leaders. And certainly this is going to be met with challenges. I think it's going to take a good while, probably more than just the 3 years that we're going to be engaged in this grant to change the culture in our archdiocese. But I think we're truly, truly blessed. And the nice thing is that Lily's is already now starting to engage with some other dioceses as well, Chicago, Atlanta, Lafayette in Indiana, so they're reaching out. So hopefully, as we start this and it continues to morph across the United States, it will make a really wonderful impact. Thank you.
One of the elements that struck me in each of your presentations was the role of knowing what your end state is, knowing where you wanted to get to. And I know I was very impressed, for example, with the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. I've been engaged with their leadership of the diocese there for some time, and the clarity with which the entire leadership of the Archdiocese could express the end state they're looking for impressed me. And Jim, in what you were speaking about, what struck me was how quickly you rattled off metrics for what you were doing and how that related to the end state that you were looking for. And Barbara Ann, when you spoke of the different leadership modes that had existed over 5 generations of leadership in your archdiocese, how the common thread of where there was engagement, there was transformation, versus where there was either an absence of leadership or an underdeveloped leadership. Those themes of engagement, leadership, metrics, and knowing where you're going seem to be threads throughout what you said. Have you noticed how those hang together in where you're trying to go as a diocese or a parish? Any of you like to comment on that or come in on that?
Being a true introvert, I'm going to need a minute to think about it.
Coming out of corporate America, we obviously had KPIs, key performance indicators. We had goals. We had strategic plans. We knew where we were and where we wanted to go. And we annually did a 5-year plan. What we did was we did an assessment. We went out and did some surveys within the parish. We looked at where we were, what we were doing, and then the pastoral council took that information and it developed the vision for where the parish was, co-responsible. They looked at what the needs of the parish and how we could affect that from a staff level and from a clergy level. So I didn't bring it. When I first got the job, the diocesan CFO gave me the book, Planning Parish. It was from the Leadership Council. I can't remember the exact name. And he said, this is your roadmap. You're not in corporate America anymore. And I went through, there were 10 checkpoints for a parish. Started going through and said, okay, we're going to do 10. Boom, boom, boom. Knocked them off. When are we going to do them? How are we going to do them? And those were key to getting where we are today.
Just come on one concrete example of that, knowing where you need to go. As we all know, Catholic schools are often in crisis across the country. And in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, that was not very different, even though we are very blessed to have a parental choice program that's now effective throughout the state. But we were looking at where do we need to go with our schools so it's not one merger of a school with another or another closure of a school. And so the right people were brought into the room, people with business experience, people with educational leadership experience, and we developed what is called the Seton Catholic Schools. It is a program whereby the management of the schools is all brought together under one umbrella. So driving down the walls that divide schools, so schools are no longer competing with one another. All of the teachers are now employees of Seton Catholic Schools rather than employees of the parish. We will have academic standards. Our motto is, and we're dealing mostly with the city schools in Milwaukee right now, and eventually it'll be a network of 23 schools. The motto we have is, good enough is not good enough. We were looking at the academics in our challenged schools with the challenged population, where we've always recognized that we're real missionaries in the city. 90% of the Catholic school children may not be Catholic, but that doesn't mean we don't need to have a Catholic school there. And so we were breaking down the challenges between parishes. So a parish needs a principal. Where do they go? They go to steal one from another school. All principals will now be managed and supervised and evaluated by the Seton Catholic school system. The transition of leadership, so raising up younger teachers and beginning to designate which ones have that kind of leadership potential to be principals. So it's a very, now you can imagine, it took a lot of long planning and calming people down. There was a lot of hand-wringing of what was going to happen. But at the same time, we see it raising the level. Through this initiative, all Catholic school teachers' salaries will be raised to a competitive level. And there will still be sacrifice to be a Catholic school teacher, but not as much sacrifice. So we had a goal in mind, and that was to raise the level of the Catholic schools to make sure that they survived. And seeing the vision, we brought the right people around the table to make that decision happen.
But as I listened to you, you also recognized that you couldn't stay where you were. And I think that's also happened in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, is that, you know, like in all dioceses, with less clergy and also with other stresses and that parishes are facing, you cannot just keep operating the same way. And so you have to make the best use, and you have to come up with a new model to be able to implement what you want to have and to carry on the vision and the mission. And I think that's what you're trying to do, and I think what we're trying to do through our parish efforts right now.
We see that constantly as we go from diocese to diocese, where, say, with the schools here, or the examples of the parish and the so on, and the Archdiocese in Indianapolis, is there's really three parts to cultural change. One is there are some structural pieces you've got to put in place. We need to align where how your resources are distributed. That's people, money, and places. And out of changing those two, being able to articulate the end state of the culture you're trying to create. And it's the alignment of structure, distribution of resources, and the knowledge of where everybody understands at the highest level to the lowest level where you're going, being able to articulate that. There's some chanceries, for example, I've worked in a lot of chanceries, where we regard them as best practice chanceries. One of the differentiators between them and other chanceries is if you talk to the chancellor, the archbishop, or the janitor, they can tell you why they're doing what they're doing. And that alignment makes a big difference in changing culture. I know you had talked about that at your parish level as well.
Changing culture is, one thing we need to realize is that we are living in a changing culture all the time. So what we're trying to do is continue to keep up with those changes. The direction I get, the skill set I had from corporate America and everything is what I brought to the table. But the direction was clearly articulated by the diocese, by the archbishop, by the CFO, what was expected of us and how we were going to move forward to get where we were going to go. And the metrics are an important part. The measurement is an extremely important part. Monsignor was talking about an offertory enhancement program. We, for the first time 2 years ago, had a decrease in offertory. And it was shocking. We had never had that. So we did an analysis and we went through and said, where are we falling down? I told you that our parish is getting younger. And what we found was the older people, my age group, we gave because that's the way mom and dad did, and that's the way grandma and grandpa did, and we were doing what we were supposed to do. Our millennials who are giving, but they don't give institutionally, they needed to be challenged to understand, or they didn't need to be challenged. We had to meet the challenge to explain to them why they should give part of their giving, their discipleship, their stewardship to the church, that we were doing the things that they were asking of instead of giving it to this charity or that charity, that we're doing that. And we just needed to deliver that message.
Thank you. Just to finish off this section, to move us into the table discussions, I want to outline 6 signs that the church has changed from what it was 10 years ago when the Leadership Roundtable started its action. 6 signs of hope. Number one, that what we see happening in dioceses and in parishes is the alignment of structure, resources, and culture around the pillars that were outlined by Elizabeth McCall this morning. Remember, there were 5 pillars that she outlined. You can go back to her presentation for those. We see that dioceses and parishes are employing different people to who they are used to. If you look at the membership of the Diocesan Fiscal Managers Conference today and the qualifications of those people, it's entirely different to what it was. That's a sign of cultural change. We see upstream work by the church, engagement in interest in best practices upstream in the church. The evidence for that is how many schools of theology and seminaries have approached the Leadership Roundtable to do pastoral management training with their alumni and even with their seminarians. 3 years ago, it was the opposite. In the last 3 years, we now have, at one stage, had 12 seminaries talking to us about of which 4 have now engaged in serious conversation about and engaging in programs for pastoral management through the roundtable. We see the conversations we're having with church leadership are no longer where we started. Where we started, we would have to invest an enormous amount of time as to why pastoral management and best practices management was important to the church. That's a conversation we don't have anymore. It's much more about the what and the how is the starting point, and that's a significant change. The engagement of professionals, there's one diocese I know that is very proud of the fact that somewhere, and they're not sure, somewhere between 60 and 70% of the entities of the diocese, the schools, the parishes and so on, have professional business managers with corporate experience. That's regarded as a very high level. Generally, they report when we talk to dioceses, and this is anecdotal, is somewhere around about 40%. But the fact is that number is growing and has grown dramatically, and the fact that they're asking that question is an important cultural piece. When I go to dioceses and around the country, what I notice is that they are able to articulate the best practices they want to embed in their diocese. They are able to talk about financial controls. They are able to talk about human resources management. That's a language that wasn't there 10 years ago. It's signs like this that give me reason for hope that the roundtable has had some impact on all of that. But it's really being driven by the leadership of the church. I have to say that the bishops I spend time with are interested, engaged, and really want to become involved in best practices in the church. That's an evidence of cultural change in the church over the last 10 years since the roundtable started. I want to thank our panelists for their contribution today. Really appreciate that, giving us the benefit of your wisdom. There are some questions on in your booklet there for your table discussion that really lead you through 3 things. One is what could be applied in your parish, diocese or organisation that you heard. Another one is about what strategies have you implemented in your particular realm of the church to create culture change, and what resources would be of assistance to you going forward in that. Okay, so if you could turn to your table discussion, and we'll come back for a final Q&A and plenary in just a little while. Okay, thank you. I actually have the first question already in front of me from the floor, and it was really addressed to Monsignor Stumpf. in the planning that you did around change in your diocese, what was the level of engagement in the priests? How did you get the clergy, if you did, engaged in the changes and aligned with the changes that you spoke about?
It's actually in process. We actually have a project manager for the grant, and Father Jeff as well. We gather together twice a year, gather all of our clergy and pastoral leaders together. So that was actually introduced to the presbyterate back a year or so ago, that we were engaged in this, and then we keep putting it before them, keep encouraging them, and then we're also really hoping now that we have one cohort through, that they're also going to be ambassadors to get other guys to want to do this, other women to want to do this. So, we're in process right now in terms of doing that, in terms of getting people more and more engaged in it.
Thank you.
Please. Give me a mic.
The microphone behind
There's
you.
the real expert on the grant.
Father Godica.
One of the strategies that we have to engage the clergy is to engage the leadership clergy first. Mm-hmm. So Archbishop, Vicar General, deans, and so forth. And hopefully, again, just as you said, the significant leaders amongst the clergy will be the ambassadors. And when we first started, we did get some pushback from the clergy, and the pushback was, you're just giving us more things to do, which is kind of the typical clergy response right now. And I've been there, done that. So, okay, let's just have everybody say what they need to say and continue moving, so that there's much less pushback right now. And I think one of the things I find with the clergy, as you do with most people, if you let people complain and then you just kind of keep moving, there's a little shift.
Thank you, Father. Yeah.
I shared this at our table, that we introduced the 360 as well. I brought it to our priest council thinking that's a logical buy-in group. And I thought we were just going to move straight through. We'll get our first cohort set up. Well, they did the deadliest thing you can do with a new idea. They sent it to committee. So it bounced back from committee to full council for a year. And at the Archbishop's request, I attend priest council meetings. And I kept watching this, and I was getting dizzy. So I went to one of our newest diocesan staff members, a young woman who has her master's degree in leadership, and I said, Michelle, you've got to get this to work. And she got excited about it. She went out to every deanery, met with them, explained it finally in a way that they understood what it was all about, and she walked away with the first 10 members of the cohort. And so it wasn't the clergy encouraging the clergy, it was this energetic young woman who was out there that got them engaged. So it can happen in lots of different ways.
Thank you. Tom?
This is for Barbara Ann, but I hope everybody can answer it. So Bishop Dowd at lunch talked about spending 3 years learning his parishes. Jim's Archbishop has been there at least 8 years, something like that. Monsignor described Bishop Tobin as having been relatively recent, 3.5 years ago. How do you cope with 5 in 5 years? How on earth do you figure out where you're going, where that much change is occurring, and you don't know who is saying how you're going, and it may change next month?
I didn't have 5 in 5 years. I've had 5 in all of my years at the Archdiocese. So we had...
It's a little better than that.
Yeah. And again, there's some consistency. We had an auxiliary bishop, Bishop Richard Scalba, who was there through it all, is a great leader. And so he had the trust of the people and he had the trust of the clergy, so he was a consistent element. Some of the things that Archbishop Listecki, our current Archbishop, now remember he came in following Mr. Dynamism, then Archbishop Dolan, and he knew right away, I can't out-Dolan Dolan. Okay, so I've just got to be myself. I'm the kid from the south side of Chicago, and that's all I can be. So he had no delusions of what his leadership was going to be. It was going to be his own. On his first anniversary of installation was the day he announced that we had filed for Chapter 11. Happy anniversary, Archbishop. But it was his leadership through that very critical time that was significant. At every meeting, he would say, all I ask of you is prayer and patience. And that became his theme through those 5 years in Chapter 11. Part of the reason it took 5 years was because we felt that truth had a place at the table and that we were not simply going to cave in and say a whole lot of things that weren't true. We weren't going to say that parish assets were the assets of the estate. They weren't. The parishes are separately incorporated. They've always been treated that way. They elect their leaders. Truth had a place at the table that not every claim that comes forward is a claim that was relevant to the Chapter 11. So in that pursuit of truth, there were lots of legal fights that had to take place with lawyers on the other side charging $650 an hour to argue, only to have the judge come back with the conclusion that we had presented in the beginning. So it was watching that dynamic of leadership. We had laid the groundwork to have a diocesan synod, thinking we'll be out of bankruptcy by June of 2014, and then we can celebrate a synod. We had a synod while we were in the midst of Chapter 11, and it was one of the most dynamic events we'd had in dozens of years. And that synod leadership now, that synod momentum is what's moving the Archdiocese forward. So those are just some anecdotal ways in which a leader moved forward even in times of crisis.
And Tom, to your question, when I've spoken to bishops and when you gather bishops and you see, I'm going to tell you how many bishops will tell you that as soon as they take office, they're asked, so what's your vision? Everybody asks them, so what's your vision? And the fact is they don't know. And the process that I've heard described by many bishops, and it takes about 3 to 5 years, just think about that, is they spend the first 2 years learning what it's like to be a bishop. Then they learn about the diocese. And the way they work out what their vision is first by a process of elimination of, I know what I don't want. And they start identifying what they don't want. For working at what they do want needs the engagement of their senior staff, their cabinet level, of their priest advisors, their deans, their presbyteral council, etc., to help the bishop move beyond, I know what I don't want. That's where the advisors have a key role in working at what they do want, articulating the opposite side of that coin. And that, because it's a very engaging process that involves a lot of very personal reflection, it's 3 to 5, they'll talk about this as a 3 to 5 year process. That's anathema to a corporate background world where a CEO comes in and has to, it's a different process. But I've heard that kind of process repeated by bishop after bishop after bishop. Other questions?
Could I just make a I just want to make a comment that in terms of talking about how we're going to get the presbyterate or different pastoral leaders to be engaged in this type of process to become better pastoral leaders, I really think in addition to working with the people we have now, we actually need to be doing something with our seminarians and people in formation, and I'm not saying that we need to be focused on trying to turn them into administrators already. I mean, the seminary curriculum is so full But what we really need to do is help them have a theological understanding that management is a key part of being a priest or a minister or a pastoral leader. And I think that's the piece I think is missing in seminary that I hope that we can help people understand, because if you can get them to buy into that, then when they're ordained and they're placed, then you can get them to become more engaged, I believe, in the type of programs that are out there to enhance their skills.
Thank you. Other questions? Bishop.
As a bishop, I just want to react to your observation there about the 3 to 5 years to develop the vision. I agree with you. That is the way it often works. My difficulty with that, and again, maybe because I'm sort of on the younger end of the Episcopal scale, the question, Bishop, what's your vision? Oh, I heard that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I heard that a lot. I remember I was just a bishop-elect at a wedding, and somebody came up to me and said, so what are you going to do to get people to come back to church? Like, Pope Francis talks about a kind of a hidden clericalism, and sometimes the assumption bishop knows best is the flip side of that.
Mm-hmm.
Bishop, what's your vision is a very good question. The better question is, Bishop, what's our vision? Which you don't always hear, because there's a presumption that the vision belongs to one person instead of the community, the group. And the pressure on the bishop to come up with his vision, which he wants to do to be a good bishop and respond to the question, is maybe not the healthiest reflex either. The answer should be, you know, what are you going to do to get people to come back to church? My answer was to the gentleman, well, I think the bigger question is, what are we going to do? And he was startled by the answer, but there's a different way of looking at the vision question. I think that's important, that we've got to develop a new reflex around that.
That was a co-responsible response. It takes that responsibility to laity also. That was very good. What are we going to do? And I think you had mentioned working with Archbishop Gregory, it's always, what are we going to do? And it is a very open forum. I mean, we, on the Finance Council and the different councils I'm on, it's always an open forum. We can disagree, we can agree, we can say what we want to say, but it also then comes back to, as the general had said earlier, communicating the vision. When you do have where you want to go, leadership is getting people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. And the only way they'll do that is if they clearly see where the end path is. And presenting that to the priest council or whoever it is, being clear in that and articulating that in a way that they buy in is a real key.
Father Baloney.
Having talked about change of culture and mentioning seminaries, we heard this morning that the Peters Pence collection gave a report of income but not expenditure, and then the question is why? And I think the answer to that is because there is no such thing as accountability in clergy. Seminarians, talking about seminary training, you're evaluated in each step going to ordination, but priests know that once they're ordained, they're not accountable anymore. If a priest is ordained and never reads a book, never goes on retreat, he's not accountable to anybody. I'm wondering, how do you change a culture that brings accountability in the life of clergy?
I don't have a set plan for that, but I can tell you some of the things that Archbishop Tobin's doing in our archdiocese, and that is he's actually strengthened the role of the deans, and so now they're actually taking on a more of a leadership role with the priests in their deanery. But then also he has every priest now coming in to meet with him during the month of their birthday, and he is calling forward some real issues about accountability. Are you going on retreat? Do you have a spiritual director? I mean, I'm not saying that this is all that needs to be done, but it's beginning to change that culture. We've never had a bishop do that before in Indianapolis, you know, and it's done in a very nice way. I mean, it's a good meeting, but he's just started to put questions before them that in my 31 years, I was never ever asked.
If I was to ask people who work in diocese here How many of your dioceses have directors of ongoing formation for clergy or the equivalent of that? How many of you have that? Okay. Sort of. Okay. If I'd asked that question 10 years ago, hardly a hand would have gone up. I would propose that that dioceses have started to structure that in. I see that increasingly around the country, of they're putting ongoing formation structures in place. Sometimes it's in name only, that's as far as they've got. Others have highly structured. But what I can tell you is that landscape is changing dramatically. The question I'd have for the panel, and perhaps other people, would be, do you think there are generational differences in that amongst clergy? Have you noticed anything on that?
I can't say that I have right now. I mean, I think there's, my sense, I'd be interested in what Jeff thought, and I'm just taking it from our diocese. I see the same sort of attitudes in the young as you do in people in my age group too. Everybody kind of wants to think that once I get out of seminary, I don't have to do anymore. So I think it's an across-the-board cultural change.
I come from a world of sources and uses of funds and capital allocation and carrots and sticks. And I'm trying to figure out what the analogy is between the diocese and the parishes in terms of whether it's capital, human resources, or some, what is it that's going from the diocese to the parish? This is a little bit of the question I asked the bishop before, that could be used as encouragement or discouragement, depending on what you want, in terms of, the evaluation process or some of these other things in order to get resources to help the parish accomplish the mission it is set out to accomplish. What are some of those analogies that you
I can tell you some things we've tried in our diocese, and I think we're moving back in this direction. When I was a younger priest, we used to actually have our own internal process that our folks went through to be evaluated, our priest did. So basically, you had an evaluation at the end of your 6 years of your first term, and that was a pretty broad-based evaluation survey that was done with your parishioners and staff, and another priest actually walked you through that process, and that information was given to the bishop in a summary format, and that was used as a decision-making piece for whether or not you should return to that particular parish. I think it's still an uphill battle, though, around those issues.
I guess I'm asking a different question.
Okay.
What are the resources that are coming from the diocese to the parishes that are critical to the lifeblood of the operation of the parish?
You've got human resources that are applied. We don't have a lot of financial resources to share. But we have personnel, for example, in the finance office, who are parish and school finance consultants. And every one of our parishes must go through a financial review. And this is a two-person office, and they train others to go with them. And they go in and they do a review of the parish finances to try to see, are there problems that the parish is too close to seeing? They're not looking at a projection out. So we bring some human resources to that. We have staff who are HR experts and are dedicated solely to school and parish personnel issues. And so the parishes, the schools make great use of those kinds of resources that can come to them so that they don't find themselves in trouble in some way.
In our diocese, every parish is audited every 2 years. We go through an audit. And the audit is not just a financial audit, but it does audit a lot of your human resources activities and everything else. And a report is then generated, and the report goes to the chair of the finance council and to the pastor, and it's shared. And it is done in a way that it is more of a teaching. You know, if you find something that's drastically wrong, you obviously take care of it. But you're looking for those risk assessment and those issues that people need help with. And again, somebody mentioned earlier, the different size parishes have different, you know, capabilities to do things. Segregation of duties at a small parish may be this person has the first number of the safe combination, I have the second, and they have the third, okay? As opposed to another way of doing it in a larger parish. So those kind of elements. But the real key I see is that we aren't communicating effectively of the resources that are available at the diocesan level and how to use those. And they don't have the resources to go out to 100 and plus parishes and manage all those parishes and do those things for them.
Talk about cultural change. We're in the midst of a process right now of developing teams from the central offices that can go out to parishes, not just in crisis moments. So the culture has been, if there's a crisis at a parish, we quickly put together a team, the team goes out, the team helps manage the crisis. We're now looking and saying, let's turn that around. Let's have teams that can go out and help good parishes become better parishes. But it is a cultural shift. We're not responding to crisis. We are trying to raise the level of parish life.
In that, as a follow-up to that note, in that journey from being reactive to being proactive, and you're right, I think in my experience I've also seen crisis is the impetus for action often. And when you talk about the third question and the reflection there, what are some of the drivers that may help institutionalize some of these changes? In my experience, I go back to time, talent, and treasure. I mean, working with Catholic schools, we try to enhance some of the fund development capacity and the marketing capacity, and with the assumption that those two would increase sustainability for Catholic schools. And the feedback from principals was, I don't have the time, I don't know how to do it, and I don't have the money to hire a fund development or a marketing manager. So unless we have access to any of those three, I won't be able to do much in institutionalizing that. I've heard that also from the parish level, and I think in that relationship, going back to the interaction often between dioceses and parishes, even some dioceses that have tried to come in with the finance committee to do an internal audit of the parish or the school, and they say these are the standards for becoming at a par with the standards of the diocesan. I've also seen parishes and schools that says, thank you, but no thank you. And the diocese said, if you do all these things, you will have access to the diocesan fund to help you institutionalize some of these changes. And they say that learning curve is too steep for us, and I don't see the broader comprehensive support to be able to do that. So my question is, hearing about the Lilly Endowment, hearing about outside, does the resources have to come from outside the system in order to effectively create the appropriate driver or impetus for that internal adaptation?
I'll just respond to that, and it's this, that our experience has been that a number of things have to come together, one of which is the relationship is in some catechesis of the diocese, I'm talking about the presbyterate and the laity, around the proper relationship between bishop and priest and bishop and presbyterate, that when that's healthy, a lot of other things fall into place, because the church operates rather than by mandate but by influence, and the bishop as the relational influence of the bishop is key to that. So that relational piece in proper relationship with each other is a key to success in that. The second thing is that when we differentiate between best practice chantries and the rest, one of the key differentiators is that the chantries that are best practice are capacity building oriented. Their whole structure, Their resources are designed specifically around how to build the capacity of parishes, whether it's in best management in practice, in temporal administration, or in some ministry areas of focus, whatever it might be. But it's capacity building. It's an orientation of the Chancery staff that it's about them, not us. So when the Chancery comes in, they are genuinely there, and their whole mental framework is oriented towards moving capacity within the parish. It's not about the central. The most dysfunctional diocesan offices you see are about control. Putting controls in place is good and necessary. For example, in the financial area, that's necessary in certain areas and in certain ways. But the fundamental framework, when it's capacity building, looks after a lot of things. That the governance function of the bishop is what's enhanced by the Chancery, not rather than his management function. So it's boundaries and direction. Okay. That's one of the key differentiators we follow. Michael.
And if I can give a direct answer to the question about internal versus external,
Yeah.
of the 3 archdioceses featured on the panel, 2 of them, it's all internal investment within the system. And the one that is out with, which is the Lilly funding, it's a matching grant. So they have to invest themselves. They have to have skin in the game in order to receive the grant. So I think the direct answer to the question in our experience is it's absolutely internal within the system. It's about prioritizing what we're using our current resources for and whether we're using it effectively for long-term capacity building, as Jim described.
The other external influence is when you've got a set of standards by which you operate, you solve a lot of problems. One is, for example, we have the Catholic Standards for Excellence. They give the bishop and the pastor cover for improving how they manage the parish and the diocese. That is, we've decided to adopt these standards, therefore the X, Y, and Z follow in our implementation of that, and that makes a significant difference to the multiple levels of a diocese. That the Catholic Standards for Excellence are a set of Independence 55 standards that enable a parish or a diocese to measure themselves against best practice. And that's a very important resource from our perspective. It actually underpins everything we do.